The reading is from Hosea chapter 1 today. The word of the Lord that came to Hosea, son of Beri, during the reigns of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah, and during the reign of Jeroboam, son of Jehoshaphat, king of Israel. When the Lord began to speak through Hosea, the Lord said to him, "Go, marry a promiscuous woman and have children with her. For like an adulterous wife, this land is guilty of unfaithfulness to the Lord." So he married Gomer, daughter of Diblaim, and she conceived and bore him a son. Then the Lord said to Hosea, "Call him Jezreel, because I will soon punish the house of Jehu for the massacre of Jezreel, and I will put an end to the kingdom of Israel. In that day I will break Israel's bow in the valley of Jezreel." Gomer conceived again and gave birth to a daughter. Then the Lord said to Hosea, "Call her Lo Ruhamah, which means not loved, for I will no longer show love to Israel, that I should at all forgive them. Yet I will show love to Judah, and I will save them, not by bow, sword, or battle, or by horses and horsemen, but I, the Lord their God, will save them." After she had weaned Lo Ruhamah, Gomer had another son. Then the Lord said, "Call him Lo Ami, which means not my people, for you are not my people, and I am not your God." Yet the Israelites will be like the sand on the seashore, which cannot be measured or counted. In the place where it was said to them, "You are not my people," they will be called children of the living God. The people of Judah and the people of Israel will come together. They will appoint one leader and will come out of the land, for great will be the day of Jezreel. This is the word of the Lord.
Thank you. Great. So, if like me, the first time you read that, you were like, "Oh my, what on earth is going on here? There's all these crazy names." Esther, well done, you did a great job. I gave her the reading and she was like, "Okay, what are all these names?" The reality is none of us really know how we're supposed to pronounce them anyway, but that was excellent. So, we're starting off a new series looking at the book of Hosea, who's one of the minor prophets in the Old Testament. And he's got a proper wacky story of what the Lord has asked him to do. And it might be that as we just read through that, you were like, okay, no idea what's going on there. But the good news is we've got a few weeks to unpack this strange story that we find in the Old Testament. And it's my job to give us a bit of an overview, to help us think about how do we get stuck in to a book like this, in a world we don't recognise, with names that we have no idea how to pronounce. How do we allow this book to reveal to us something of God in an age like today? I thought I'd start with a little story. I do like to do a bit of confession time sometimes. When I was a child, I made a promise to my parents that I would always tell the truth, no matter what. And they promised me that they would always do the same. Now, as I became a teenager, this promise became a little bit harder to keep. Because my friends were like, going out, staying out late and going to places underage they shouldn't have been. And I really, really wanted to go. I wanted to go to all the places and do all the things that my friends were doing. But in order to do that, sometimes I had to lie. I know, it's terrible, isn't it? And there was this one particular time when I was 17, and it was my friend's 18th birthday, and I told my parents that we were just going around her house. It was just a few girls, a gathering, and that her parents would be there, and it was her 18th, so there would be some drink there, but it was all pretty chill. But in truth, we were all getting on a party bus to go up to Mayfair to try and get into a club in central London. Terrible. Now, some of the girls were already 18, so they had their IDs and that was fine. But some of us were using other people's IDs. I'm seeing some nods around the room. Perhaps this story isn't too unfamiliar for some of us in here. Anyway, I was using one of the IDs from this random girl that was not my own. And anyway, we get on the bus, We're all very excited. There's lots of girly screaming. We get there, we get off the bus, we get in the queue to get into this club. And at that point, you're like, oh my goodness, my heart is like absolutely pounding. Thinking, am I going to get in? Am I going to get in? I've like memorised the address on the ID. I think, what's her birth, like Gemini or whatever, what's her star sign? Because sometimes they ask you that to catch you out of this like ID that I had that was not me. Anyway, all the other girls get in ahead of me. I feel like I've told a very similar story to this before. This is classic me. And I'm the last one. I must go first. That is the lesson that I should learn. Anyway, so I'm the last person to get in, and I give the bouncer my ID. He looks at my ID, and obviously I'm like, please let me in, please let me in. And he reads it out loud. He goes, Tammy Pamela. And he looks at me, and he looks at the ID. 25. And I'm just like literally little 17-year-old me. It's just like looking at him like, please let me in. Anyway, suffice to say, I did not get into the club. He confiscated the ID, which was a nightmare because it was one we shared with like lots of other girls as well. So I was in a lot of trouble. And suddenly I realise, oh crap. I am in the middle of central London with no coat, obviously, because who takes a coat clubbing when they're 17? Killer Hills, it's the middle of November, by the way. And suddenly I am all on my own in central London. What am I going to do? I'm in serious trouble. I've never really been out and about in London before. I don't know the underground system. I've definitely not got enough money for a cab. What do I do? Well, by this point, there's only one thing I can do, and that's to call my dad. So I call my dad, and by this point, I'm already bawling my eyes out. I'm absolutely freezing. I'm lost, I'm scared, and I'm really feeling quite embarrassed. A, that I have to call my dad, and B, that I didn't get into the club with everyone else. It was just like insult to injury. So I had to come clean. And the only thing that I could do was to tell my dad the truth. Dad, I'm out in central London. I've got no idea where I am. How on earth do I get home? And I hear my dad, and he takes a deep breath. And then he dad-navved me all the way back through the underground, back onto a train, all the way home. And finally, I rock up at our front door about 1 a.m. My feet are dirty because obviously I've given up on the heels at that point. I've got no jacket still. I'm absolutely freezing. Feet are black. He opens the door and I just fall into his arms and he just gives me this massive hug. Now I know that my dad is livid. I know that he is so angry. And even worse, I know that he's disappointed because I'd lied, I'd put myself in danger. But I also knew that he loved me. I had to apologise, of course, I had to take the consequences. But I knew that no matter what, no matter how badly or how badly I messed up, how much I'd broken promises that I'd made to them, that I'd lied, that the mess that I'd gotten myself into, that no matter what, my dad would always rescue me. So today we're starting this new sermon series, all about this prophet Hosea. And this short book in the Old Testament is all about the Father's heart. Hosea, he finds himself in the midst of this really turbulent time in the life of God's people. The unity and the splendour of the kingdoms of King David and Solomon are a distant memory. And as we read in the passage earlier today, you might have noticed it talked about Israel and it talked about Judah as well. And this kingdom was once united. It was once the united kingdom of Israel. And 200 years before Hosea, it divided in two. And they had 2 separate kings and 2 separate kingdoms. So all of this unity that the people of God have been working towards had been cut in half. There's division, there's disunity. And God's people are quickly losing their identity their way of life, this precious way of life that God had called them to when he called them up out of Egypt, when he rescued them, when he said to them, "You are my people and I am your God." All of this is starting to disintegrate. And then there's this king on the throne in Israel. This king is called Jeroboam II, and just like his namesake and his predecessors, he was way more interested in political alliances, in power, than following God's law, than following God's word, keeping the commandments, and keeping the people of God living in a way that keeps them in right relationship with God. He wasn't interested in that at all. He wanted to make alliances, he wanted power. And you can read about him properly in 1 Kings, but essentially he compromised on just about everything you could compromise on. He allowed the worship of idols, he allowed the worship of other gods, and all the religious practices that came with that. Temple prostitution, slavery, sacrifice, and a load of other evils, just in order to maintain these alliances that he'd made with these other ancient nations like Assyria and Egypt. He compromised on just about everything for the sake of power, for the sake of political gain. And the result? That God's people were forgetting him. God's people were losing who they were, forgetting who they were, putting their trust in these kings and other gods and dabbling in practices that were unholy and evil, going with the culture, ignoring the poor and the needy, losing themselves. And Hosea 4 puts it like this: "There is no faithfulness or steadfast love, no knowledge of God in the land. There is swearing, lying, murder, stealing, committing adultery. They break all bounds, and bloodshed follows bloodshed. They have deserted the Lord." And in that little passage where it talks about knowledge, the kind of knowledge is not just about knowing things about God. The kind of knowledge that this is talking about is like knowing a person. It's a different kind of knowledge. They've forgotten their relationship with God. They've not only forgotten about him, but they've forgotten who he is to them and who they are to him. They have deserted the Lord. And into this mess, this crisis of identity and morals, God calls Hosea to be a prophet, to be his mouthpiece to his people. And God, what he asks of Hosea is to live a life of prophetic demonstration, a symbol of God's relationship with his people. And I don't know about you, but initially when I think about the word prophet, I think of somebody who maybe has like visions of the future, kind of like a fortune teller or a showman, someone with a crystal ball, and in lots of cultures that's kind of what a prophet is. But in the Old Testament, prophets are something very different. They're not showmen, they're not people with crystal balls, and sometimes they talk about the future, but that's actually not their main job. They talk about consequences. But the whole point of them is to call God's people back to God, is to remind them who they are. This is who you are. Don't you know who you are, people of God? Don't you know who your God is? Remember what he has done for you. And Old Testament prophets, they're not like these big showmen or fortune tellers where people kind of flock to, where they wear like epic robes and they're kind of given quite high standing, or the kind of celebrity personalities. That's not what they're like at all. They were often outcasted, persecuted for the messages that they had to bring. And Hosea was no exception. Hosea's prophecy is all about identity, warning, and future hope. It reveals God's character and shines a light on human nature. And the passage that we read today, I'm trying not to give too many spoilers because we've got a few weeks to really get stuck in to this book. But the passage we read today is like Act 1 of a 3-part play. It says, when the Lord began to speak through Hosea, the Lord said to him, "Go and marry a promiscuous woman and have children with her. For like an adulterous wife, this land is guilty of unfaithfulness to the Lord." Of Hosea, God asks the unimaginable. Hosea's life will be a prophetic demonstration of God's broken relationship with Israel. God says to him, "Go and marry this woman, Gomer, who will be unfaithful to you. Raise children with her who you won't know are your own, whose names will represent the consequences birthed out of Israel's unfaithfulness. Go and marry this woman. Go and live this kind of life." And when we talk about God's calling on our lives now, we talk about, I feel like I have this sense from the Lord that he's asking me to do this thing, or we talk about it like an adventure, like maybe moving to a new country, or starting a new career, or getting a new job, or feeling really cool to a particular place, or to love a particular people group. We don't think of God asking us to do something like this. And yet of Hosea, he asks it. Why? To show the character and the nature of God, and to reveal the condition of the human heart. Like Hosea's wife, in their brokenness, Israel has chosen themselves, their disordered desires of promotion and power and pleasure, over God and their neighbour. Just like unfaithfulness in a marriage, sin breaks the relationship between us and God. But there is hope. There is always hope. Acts 2 and 3 of this kind of Hosea play talk about God's rescue and God's restoration. Despite all that Gomer has done, despite all of her unfaithfulness, God tells Hosea to go and buy her back, to recommit himself to her once more. See, by this point in the story, Gomer has left the family. She's gone off and she's found herself in a really dark place. And God says to Hosea, "Go and find her. Go and buy her back. Go and bring her home. Go and recommit yourself to her." So in obedience, Hosea goes. He goes to try and find his wife. His wife who's left him, his wife who's been unfaithful to him, his wife who has caused him nothing but heartbreak and pain. Go and find her. So he goes and he finds her at this slave market. She's dirty, she's dishevelled, she's being sold for next to nothing. She's worthless. Why would anyone buy her? Why would God ask him to buy her back? And yet he does. Hosea 2, God says that despite all that Israel have done, he chooses them again because of his love, because of his compassion, because of his faithfulness. God's love and mercy are more powerful than Israel's sin. God's love and mercy are more powerful than our sin. And Hosea's life, these life events, reveals God's ultimate heart, that is to heal and to save his people, to bring them home, to bring us home. And it might be that by now you're beginning to wonder, well, what does any of this really have to do with me and my life now? What does this nearly 3,000-year-old story set in a culture I don't recognise, with people that I don't know, have anything to say to me? it is a reminder that God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And that there is nowhere that he wouldn't go, no length that he wouldn't take, no place that he wouldn't travel to, no depths that he wouldn't go to bring us home, to bring you home. And that our God has always been a God of forgiveness, of rescue, of future hope. And at the end of the passage that we read today, it speaks of a future leader that will come out of Judah, this kind of other half of the broken kingdom, who will bring all people together. A kind of king who will build a different kind of kingdom, and one who invites us to come and build it with him. One built on mercy, justice, peace, compassion. A kind of king who would pay the ultimate price to bring us home, to buy us back, to restore us. One who has always been about partnership and relationship. One who ushers in the kingdom of heaven. King Jesus. What kind of life of prophetic demonstration is God asking you to live? And I would argue that it's one that is shaped by the Father's heart. No matter how dirty, how broken, how fallen we are or we think we might be, the Father will always come and bring us home. And if we really knew, deep, deep, deep in our hearts, if we really knew that God loved us like that, how differently would we live? How differently would we love? Hosea knew this God. And because of that, he lived this life of obedience that demonstrated to the rest of the world, this is the heart of the Father. See, we're offered in Jesus to live a life that is shaped by him. Jesus shows us ultimately what God is like. He says, come and follow me. Come and live like me. And our response is to live lives of prophetic demonstration of that kind of love. To live out of this place of knowing that we are deeply loved, knowing the Father's heart, and to be able to live lives shaped by that as a blessing to others. If we really knew that God loved us like that, how differently would we love? I think there are a few things that God might want to do with us this morning, but I'm not going to be prescriptive about it. So I'm just going to invite us to stand, and we're going to invite the Holy Spirit, and we're just going to see what he wants to do this morning. So why don't we stand? I'm going to pray for us, and the band are going to come up in just a moment.